Hello and welcome to Subject to Blackout. My name is Timo, and with me, as always, is Mike from the Name Taken Podcast. Mike, how you doing?
Doing good, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well. We were unfortunately not able to do last week's pod, so while we were going to talk about Hidden Fortress, we'll still talk about that in the second half, but I think it's fair to say we're both pretty excited about the upcoming Denis Villeneuve Dune, and in preparation for that, we decided to watch the 1984 version of Dune. And Mike, you've seen this movie before, correct?
I have seen it before, yeah. So I didn't do a rewatch this morning, but I did. I've seen it before. I also have, seen uh, Yodorowski's Dune, the whole
Yes.
documentary, and know the entire history of that movie. And I've read the book like twice.
Yeah. So 1984's Dune is not a great movie.
It's a pile of shit. So, it's so terrible that the several cuts of the film have David Lynch's name removed because he doesn't
Correct.
want to associate with it.
Yeah, I believe Alan Smithy
Yes.
filled in for him there.
Correct.
Whoever the fuck that is. But of course, based on the Frank Herbert novel Dune or series of novels.
Yeah.
But specifically, the movie is based on the first one, as will Denis Villeneuve's first Dune movie. This is, like you said, it's a big mess.
Yeah.
I had also seen it before, and I also am of the opinion that it's not very good. But I was background watching it today, especially right before we came in. And there's just so many weird choices made in that movie. And it's just ugly and bland. And the CGI is so obvious. And there's just not a lot to love about what's actually happening in the movie. But Mike, can you explain to me why I'm still super excited for a Dune movie?
Dune is like Lord of the Rings in space. So if you're down with the epic majesty and intensity of like the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, Dune is perfect. That said, like Tolkien was not down for Frank Herbert. He thought that Dune, the novel, sucked. But it's of the same breadth, and the world building is as extensive and epic. So,
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is in Dune there's clearly bones of what could be a really fun cinematic experience or television experience. There's been a mini series about Dune that was fairly well received from what I've heard. I've never seen it, but this movie tries to cram a very large novel into 2 hours and 15 minutes.
it does. And it also, I mean, the production of the movie itself suffered from a lot of executive meddling. So the finished product is absolutely a reflection of like a very kind of like schizophrenic creative process that there's like lots of different things cobbled together. David Lynch didn't really even have wasn't given like final cut privilege either. So he wasn't really editing the final film either. It was done by somebody else entirely. One thing I will say, Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides, you know what would be way better? Macaulay Culkin. Imagine young Home Alone era Macaulay Culkin flipping out on the desert planet of Arrakis.
He's just like, my name is a killing word. And he's just like got paint cans to take out all the the Harkonnens.
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't that have been sick?
Dune alone.
Dune
it
thumping plays
this
in the
summer.
background.
Somebody. I could see it, and I would watch that movie.
Yeah.
So let's, in brief, for anyone who hasn't seen Dune, it's available to stream on a bunch of different platforms right now. Like much of everything these days, it's on HBO Max, but it's also on Amazon Prime, and I think you can stream it for uh, not for free. If you're paying for a subscription service on a couple other sites, you can also stream it there. Um, I would say if you have 2 hours and 15 minutes to background watch something, you
Run,
could
don't
do
walk.
worse.
We have done worse, actually. I think
Yeah.
we've definitely watched movies that were worse than this, Dune.
Yeah. Waterworld is worse than this. The thing
Waterworld is like Dune. It's like wet Dune, really. It's
well,
like opposite Dune.
and so yeah, it is it really is wet Dune.
This is what the pitch meeting was like for Waterworld. What if it's like Dune water?
What if we just call
wet Waterworld?
Wet World? Huh? What about that? Huh? I think this is a great idea. I would just say up front, I think it's worth a watch. I think it's worth a spin. There's a lot of weird shit going on. There's space bending, traveling vagina monsters.
Yep.
Um,
Sting.
there's Sting in a singlet.
Yep.
There's festering pustules. There's
Yes.
latent homosexuality equals evil.
Yeah. So there are some traditional David Lynch elements that are
Yeah.
in the movie.
Yeah, and there is an inordinate amount of like narration.
God damn it! The narration is like such a. The narration is the mind killer. The narration is the little death. It's like the worst part of that movie.
It's not like a narrator narrating. It's just like the inner monologues of tons of different characters. Like everybody gets a moment where at some point the camera is on them in a tight one shot and they're not moving and they're doing voiceover of just like clearly what's going on in their head. Like my son might die tonight. It's like, okay, like why did you need to say that? Like, but also not say it. Just do it in a narration voiceover thing. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
When he's like when he's riding the fucking worm too. It's like
Oh my
it's
god.
kind of like it's the voiceovers are like Memento. You know what I mean? Like, wait, why is he chasing me? It's like that kind of voiceover. Like, what is this doing here? I don't need an inner voice.
And also there's like these moments. Yeah, I mean, there's these moments where like specifically I was just watching that worm scene right before we jumped on here. There's where like a character is like having a dream, but he's doing that thing you would do in a terrible like $8 movie where he's like, sand, dune,
Spice.
the spice. But they're like supposed to be asleep, but they're speaking full words. Like perfectly clear. The worms are the spice. The spice are the worms. Like, why is this happening? There's so many bizarre choices. So I'm looking forward to a modern director taking the bones of this and you know, taking the structure of the book and making a movie that isn't laughably bad.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool shit in this, like fear is the mind killer and putting his hand in the box and the worms and, you know, political intrigue, but it's all just kind of poorly done, poorly edited. You know the structure of the book, and we'll get into what actually the plot of the first book and movie are in a minute here. But I've never read the book. I've never read any of the books. But
great.
What I would imagine is this movie, for the first hour and a half, is the first half of the book, and then like the last 45 minutes is the second half of the book, and it feels super rushed in the second half. Like they're just like 2 years later. Like there's so much fast forwarding in the second half of this movie that it's like breakneck and confusing and very off-putting.
Yeah, so the book is really divided into two parts. The first part ends a little bit after a fairly important moment for the Atreides family.
Yes.
And then about 65%, so two-thirds of the rest of the book happens at like a time jump of several years after those
Okay.
events.
That kind of lines up.
So that's kind of how the book is organized, but the latter half is much longer than the beginning. The beginning is almost kind of just like the setup to like a bunch of shit happening in the desert.
Gotcha. Yeah, so let's get into it. Now that we've talked about it a little bit, spoilers are coming up. We're going to talk about the plot of 1984's Dune. So basically, we open up with a space vagina mouthed monster
As one
telling
does.
the emperor of the universe or whatever,
Emperor of the Galaxy.
basically that uh House Atreides is
Right.
going to be a threat to him. They're
Yeah.
developing this weapons technology and they're well liked and they're good leaders, and it's a threat to his power. And also, for reasons unknown, they want his son dead. Paul, who will be our main character. And once that starts a political intrigue thing where they're going to pit House Harkonnen, which are ancient rivals, with House Atreides, and they're going to tell the Atreides that they can now take over control of Dune, which is where Spice is. Mike, would you like to tell me what Spice is?
The
What it
spice
does?
melange.
Melange.
The spice is it's like a drug kind of. It is it's like an important drug, or it's important for space travel, and it's also important for like being able to tell the future and do like divination and stuff. So it has like a practical purpose. It also has like a spiritual significance, and it's found on this kind of otherwise backwater planet of Arrakis, where at least we have the impression at the outset that it's a sort of hostile and kind of brutal environment.
Yeah, it's sort of portrayed as Tatooine, which
Yes.
there's a reason for that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, as we will talk about later,
Here comes George Lucas. I'll take
yeah,
that.
hidden Fortress and Dune, you'd kind of mash them together, and you get the first Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
Um, there was a lot of influence by Dune on especially that first Star Wars film that was released in the 70s. Also, what is notable about spice is that it is an addictive substance that if
Yes.
you ever stop using it, once it first ingested, you will die.
Yep. Also, it turns
Uh,
your eyes blue, and it's like
and
cool.
it turns your eyes blue,
Yeah.
which is, yeah, dope if that's what you're into. And basically, yeah, like you said, is pretty much everything important in the universe. So whoever controls Dune, the sole planet where spice comes from, controls a vast wealth and power. So what the Emperor's plan is to get the Atreides to go to Dune, where the Harkonnens had been in control,
Yep.
give them control of Dune, and then secretly allow the Harkonnens to
Wipe them out.
attack and kill off the bloodline of Duke Leto and his son Paul Atreides.
Yep.
Uh,
And Paul at this point in the book is kind of a bitch.
in the movie, he's not exactly a bitch, but he's not doing a whole lot. So,
We don't necessarily like Paul yet. Paul's kind of lame. He's not cool or anything.
uh, what then happens is
He's precocious. He's doesn't understand good leadership. He's just kind of like a 12-year-old.
yeah, in the movie, he seems to have like preternatural skills at like certain things. He is a very good fighter. They lead you to believe. It seems like he has like almost intuitional type foresight about what's going to happen. On Dune, he starts having these dreams, and his mother, who's a witch, that's the fastest explanation of
Yep.
that, um, thinks that he might be this prophesized leader that is supposed to help change the galaxy or whatever.
Right. They're kind of messiah.
Yeah.
They're entirely female coven.
Yeah. Again, witches.
Yep.
So then what happens next is they go to Dune, and exactly what the plan was by the Emperor and the Harkonnens happens. Exactly as they seemingly would hope it would.
Right.
House Atreides falls. Duke Leto dies.
Paul and his pregnant mother driven into the desert, assumed dead.
And the spice falls under the purview of the Harkonnens again. They're evil guys with warts on their face. And yeah, they're the bad guys because they're gingers, including Sting. Ginger Sting.
Yep. Fucking Sting. Meanwhile, Paul
on the other side of Dune, Paul and his mother find safety with the Fremen, the native
indigenous
residents of Dune.
Arrakis, yep. Who live in the desert, which sucks. Wear these suits where that
you can just take a dump moisture in. Yep. Yeah, you shit and piss in them, and you sweat, and it all collects, and that way you can live in that suit for like months at a time. Yeah. So there's that. So they somehow survive, and they get collected by the Fremen, and very quickly he becomes their savior. Yeah. And I would say white savior, but they're all white too, because there's no people of color in this movie.
No. I never got the impression there were in the book either. So
yeah, he becomes their savior. He takes the spice. His mother becomes like the leader of the witches on their planet.
Yep.
He takes a poison and just has a wicked trip in the desert. I mean, we've all been there. And then he decides that he's going to climb up on one of these giant sandworms and just fucking ride it. And so he does. And then he helps take Dune back from the Harkonnens and
becomes emperor.
Yeah, more or less. End of movie. So that's it. That's Dune. There's a lot of stuff to go on there for a much better version of this movie.
Right.
But what I'm kind of interested to hear is apparently this next Dune is just going to be that first half where presumably it's going to end with Timothée Chalamet being thrown out into the desert after the Harkonnens take over.
This movie? It's not going to be the whole thing? It's just going to be the first half?
It's not going to be the whole thing.
Did they film like the entire thing and they're just dividing it up, or?
There is strong hope by Denis Villeneuve that if this movie goes well, and it's been open in large parts of the world for some time now,
right?
And it's been making a killing, especially in COVID times. There is hope that as soon as pretty much the box office shows that this is a viable movie, like they're gonna start production on the second half. But as far as I know, it is still not greenlit for a second movie. So I heard from watching Fat Man Beyond with Kevin Smith and Mark Bernardin, the pop culture podcast. They have actually seen the movie, and they were a little surprised at how it ended, very cliffhangery.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, if that means we get a second Dune and maybe a third Dune or a fourth Dune, I'm all about it.
Do you think that we will get what do you think will come first? The conclusion to this Dune movie or another Avatar movie?
Oh, I think that's obvious. It's going to be a conclusion to the Dune movie.
Yeah, I remember that.
We're going to get 8 more Dune movies before we get a single sequel to Avatar.
I'm just going to check. How's Avatar doing? That's like if Waterworld was like what if Dune was wet, Avatar is like what if Dune was stupid.
What if Dune were Fern Gully? In 3D. Yeah, that movie that is a movie that had that everyone in the world fucking saw because it wasn't banned in certain countries because there was nothing controversial about it.
Right.
It was just like planets are good. Be nice to people. But basically that movie was seen by everyone in the world at least one time. And then everyone was like, so? Like there was no cultural like lasting imprint of that Avatar movie, and the idea that you're gonna make like 9 more of those is laughable, especially because it came out fucking decade ago.
Over a decade ago now. Yeah, over, what is it, 12 years ago? I mean, remember, the only reason that movie did well was because of its gimmick. It was really one
Yeah,
of the first movies to take advantage of 3D.
yeah, and like modern 3D where you weren't wearing red and blue shades.
Right. But now we've had a bunch of those, and we've also just sort of like kind of gotten sick of 3D. So
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know what would, I don't know why we would care about James Cameron.
we shouldn't. I will say though, speaking of giant film franchises, with us watching Hidden Fortress
Yes.
and then watching this, I did feel like we were prepping for Star Wars much more so than I felt like we were prepping for another Dune movie.
Yeah, maybe we should watch Star Wars. Maybe we should just, I don't know. Let's
It's
just
a possibility.
yeah, we don't have to watch the sequels again. I'm good, but
Yeah, I could watch original Star Wars in the near future.
yeah.
But there, it's hard to talk about Dune without talking about like there is this disappointment that I have with this movie. It was hyped up to me by people who, you know, I know and respect who like science fiction and you know that sort of like pop culture-y stuff. And obviously the books are well regarded by most people. Have a large fan support. But this movie, I was told was good, and it's a stinker. Like it's.
You were told the 1984 Dune was good?
I was told it was entertaining.
Who said that?
Well, I mean, again, like podcasts and stuff that I listen to, and pop culture critics that I like quote Dune as being like one of their favorite movies growing up. And I think that's because you have to be 12 to think this is a good movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I Dune is like 1984's Dune is one of those movies. It's sort of like it's perfectly situated for some asshole to come along now and be like, "Oh, it's underappreciated." Like it is perfectly and appropriately appreciated for what it is.
Yes.
This isn't under or overrated. It is rated.
Yes. Again, because there's stuff there. There's scenes of David Lynch trying to be weird David Lynch.
Yeah.
And it's not coming through 100%, and it's not working for me. But he's trying to do some weird stuff. But you brought it up earlier. There's a wonderful documentary called Yodorowski's Dune.
Yep.
And it's about, I believe he's like French and Argentinian director, Yodorowski. And he wanted to do this like 10-hour Dune saga.
Right.
And basically collected some of the best artists and actors and musicians in the world. And we're all
like
collaborating. Yeah. Collaborating on amazing stuff. And the parts of that film that live on don't live on in that film because it was never shot.
Right.
But like you get Geiger's interpretation of like Alien from that.
Yep.
You get these far out like freaky spaceships, which is like psychedelic and trippy as balls. You had, famous actors or musicians being lined up to play in certain roles. You had
Mick Jagger was in there. Salvador Dali was going to be in it.
Yeah. Salvador Dali was going to be the emperor,
for $100,000 an hour, by the way.
Because that's the number Salvador Dali pulls. You want Salvador Dali in your flick, it's $100,000 an hour. Okay? That's why he's in Fievel Goes West for 3 minutes.
Yeah, how much is that divided by 60?
A lot. A lot. But they had Five Goes West money, so it was fine.
Yeah, that's right. That was the era where who did that? Was that Don Bluth?
I have no idea. No idea who did Five Goes West. But Yodorowski's Dune is a wonderful documentary about the trippy, wild thing that Dune could have been in the 80s. And then I don't know which studio just dumped a whole bunch of water on that and just turned it into this. But, and I know that's not what we're going to get from Dune that's coming out next week. But I am still very much intrigued by the potential that movie has, especially since the director already took a work of science fiction from the 1980s that is okay and made it a much, much better sequel just a few short years ago.
Right.
With Blade Runner.
Ooh. Blade Runner.
It's the official position of this podcast that Blade Runner 2049 is a better film than Blade Runner.
Oh, I don't know about original Blade Runner, possibly one of the greatest movies, and then there's also Blade Runner 2049, which is it's like what if we
made a better movie?
What if we made Dune? But I can't. I'm trying to just like relate everything back to Dune. I can't do it. I'm panicked.
What if we made Dune but Blade Runner?
But 2049.
But in the future. The second half of Dune, where they jump ahead. All right, well, I think that is going to conclude our talks of 1984 Dune. Obviously, we're excited for the film next week. That'll be in theaters. Mike, I think we should go to a theater. Gosh darn it. I think it'll be dropping on HBO Max, but I want to see a second half of Dune as well as the first half of Dune. So maybe send our money to the box office.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm going to get my Johnson & Johnson booster. I could tear it up.
Let's do it. All right, let's take a little break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit about Hidden Fortress. Next week on Subject to Blackout. After over a year of fits and starts, Denis Villeneuve's much-anticipated adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune will premiere this Friday in theaters and on HBO Max. Mike and I are both very excited for this brand new version of Dune, in part because Denis Villeneuve's terrific body of work, as well as a stellar cast, including Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Oscar Isaac, Jason Momoa, David Bautista, Stellan Skarsgård, and many more. Jodorowsky's Dune was the fever dream too purely amazing to be realized, and David Lynch's version was too much of a train wreck to take hold in pop culture in the mid-1980s. But right now there seems to be a revolution in pop culture hard sci-fi, and this adaptation of Dune might just be the version that gets us a Dune cinematic universe. So join us next week, won't you? By watching Dune in theaters or at home on HBO Max, and remember, fear is the mind killer. All right, well, the other movie we watched over the last couple of weeks, the one that we watched first actually was Hidden Fortress. And Mike, can you tell me a little bit about Hidden Fortress?
Sure. Well, so Hidden Fortress is one of Kurosawa, the famous post-war Japanese directors. Like, it's one of his most acclaimed films. He also did, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo. Hidden Fortress is well known to the West for a couple of reasons. It's in its own right. It's an innovative film, both from like a narrative perspective and also from like a technical perspective. So we, critics still point to this movie as being really significant. But it was also one of the most significant influences for the original Star Wars trilogy. So George Lucas drew so heavily on elements of Kurosawa's films that you can actually sit down and match up particular scenes and particular characters from Star Wars with characters and scenes from Kurosawa's entire filmography. But
especially Hidden Fortress.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned to you, we actually went out for dinner last night, and I mentioned to you, I believe, that I had a little bit of issue watching the movie in that I accidentally kind of broke it up into parts because the first night I was watching it, I knew I wasn't going to make it all the way through. So I kind of stopped, and then I took a couple of days, and then I basically had to watch it the second half of the movie and several days removed from the first half. So it's a little fragmented for me. And that kind of took away from it a little bit. I mean, that's just my fault.
I
That's
think you
an
also just have
experiential.
you have a hard time with movies that don't have Chris Tucker in them.
Everyone should have a hard time with movies without Chris Tucker in them. More Chris Tucker, yes, please. No, but there is clearly, especially looking at that first Star Wars movie to come out, which is the thing you have to say, because there's like 4 different versions of the first Star Wars movie. But you look at the first Star Wars movie that came out, and you can clearly see, again, I mean, you pointed it out to me before we watched the movie, but the 2 peasant characters are
Right.
clearly analogs to C-3PO and R2-D2.
Right.
With less clicks and whistles. But also, there's a princess who's in trouble, who you basically have to smuggle.
But she is also kind of like a badass.
Yes.
She kind of subverts the damsel in distress, which this is
Yes.
the 1950s, so that was kind of like a big deal.
And this
yeah.
movie might pass the Bechdel test, because when she saves that other woman, and I believe they have a conversation that's not about anyone being romantic about her. So
That's true. Yeah, the romantic, there's the the driving force of this movie is to like for everyone to find their way to safety, to kind of like navigate through this kind of like war torn region of Japan. You can think about it like
navigating
escaping
an asteroid field.
Yeah, or escaping the Death Star.
Yeah. Maybe both.
Yes.
But yeah, and there's this very cool general character who is referred to several times as boss, because he's clearly a man of leadership, a man of power.
That's why he has a
very
full beard,
very,
tiny shorts.
The tiniest of shorts. The real nut huggers. And very cool, calm, and collected at all times, much like Han Solo. We don't really have a Luke analog in this, but that's fine, because Luke in that first movie, for the most part, is a whiny little bitch.
He's a bitch.
He gets cooler, but let's be real, he's a whiny little bitch in that movie. And I thought, like, you mentioned it to me last night, like, you didn't even realize, like, that checkpoint scene, like, oh wow, that's like straight out of Star Wars' playbook. You get a whole bunch of vignettes and scenes, like at the end, where the princess is safe, and she and her entourage are thanking the 2 peasants who helped them. That is very much like the award scene at the end of the first Star Wars movie.
Yes.
There's a lot where you're like, what I feared coming into this was that it was going to be shot for shot, and I was going to think less of George Lucas. And that's the last thing I want in this world. The man who keeps retooling his films for 20 years, much to the hatred of his fans.
Yeah.
I would hate to think less of him. But no, I think he took, and especially watching Dune, he obviously took pieces from multiple spots and was like, I want samurai, but I want them in the desert, and I want a cool badass princess. Like, he was pulling from different pockets, but even to the point of the sort of like scene transition wipes, it was just like, this is so Star Wars-y.
Yeah, it's exactly where he got. Yeah. Kurosawa's scene transitions are George Lucas's. George Lucas took those directly. I mean, one thing that's important about Hidden Fortress is that it presents a type of dynamic among the main characters that George Lucas used throughout both the original and the prequel trilogies. And it's that there are both serious characters and characters that offer basically comic relief, and that they're all together. So it's a nice, when it's done correctly, like in the sequel trilogy and in the Hidden Fortress. It's actually like a nice, it's a nice dynamic because
Yeah.
it allows you to balance the intensity of some of the action sequences with something a little bit lighter, so you're not overwhelming an audience. Um, and that's where we see, C3PO and R2D2 as sort of being kind of like detached and kind of providing commentary on the events that are going on, and also just kind of like being a little like bumbling and difficult. So that's really one of the big things that I think George Lucas took out of Hidden Fortress. Now, like when we get into the prequel trilogies, George Lucas kind of, Flanderizes the C3PO and R2D2 and makes them a little bit more like Laurel and Hardy than he does the
Yeah.
characters in Hidden Fortress. But I think that type of dynamic, which works extremely well in the original trilogy, is something that is very much drawn out of Hidden Fortress.
Well, and that also provides an extremely modern feel to a movie that's at least 60 years old or 70 years old at this point almost.
Yes.
Um and that was something that I was struck by. I enjoyed the film.
Hmm.
I didn't think it was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think at least part of that is my corrupted viewing experience. Um, and one of the biggest problems I had was a little bit long. And the two peasant characters just got annoying. I hate it when characters make decisions that are so fucking stupid that no one would ever make them in real life.
Yeah, the idiot
And like the
ball, as it's called.
yes.
Yeah.
And when they go back and try to snatch up a couple more pieces of gold and basically like get caught like after the fire sequence,
Mm.
um I was just getting frustrated with how repetitive their decline into just like trying to grift was.
Sure.
I was done with that plot line. So, but those were my two main things. Is a little bit long, got tired of the peasants thing after a while, and that's one thing in Star Wars is C3PO and R2D2 fade into the background pretty quick. They help you get into the world, and then you get away from that to more interesting characters. But back to the very modern approach that Kurosawa is displaying, that mix of lighthearted comedy, almost physical comedy sometimes, as well as a very serious storyline. This princess is dealing with the destruction of her armies and the enslavement of her people, and like there, and the general's sister basically sacrifices her life so that the princess may live by
Yes.
claiming that there are scenes where it is emotionally hitting,
Yeah.
and there are consequences, deadly consequences in this world. But he is like a very modern movie mixing that in with lighter elements to sort of alleviate the stress of that for the film goer. And I thought that was incredible. I also thought you see a lot of movies in this era just kind of like set a camera down and shoot.
Right.
And
This one's in
to
motion. It's very exciting.
yeah, and there's so many shots that felt the best word I can describe them is modern, and I'm that's the theme of this segment.
Sure.
but it felt shot like something from now, as opposed to something from 60, 70 years ago. And I think that is why, as I said a couple of weeks ago on the preamble, on the ad talking about that we were going to watch this movie, this is why Kurosawa is clearly the director's director. Like all of your favorite directors consider Kurosawa a genius, and that's because he was doing in the 1950s and 60s what people were still have a hard time grasping and using in their own work, even, as far as 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
It is masterful, because while the movie, being in black and white, being in Japanese, being shot on film, it reads on your television or the cinema screen as an old movie.
Yeah.
But there's nothing about it that is like, oh, well, you wouldn't do that these days.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everything is just fine-tuned, well thought out, beautiful camera movements, good composition. Like, it's just clear, like, this is why your favorite director thinks Kurosawa is his favorite director, or her. All right, Mike. Now that we've talked about that, is there anything else you have been watching over the last couple of weeks, or maybe listening or reading, or what's going on in your pop culture life?
I've been revisiting Dune, been rereading Dune, so I'll definitely be done with that before we check out the movie. What was I watching? I'm rewatching all of Cowboy Bebop in anticipation of the Netflix series. Been enjoying going back through that, but again, I said this before, but the music is such an important character. Now that I know that they invested so much in recreating the musical element in the Netflix one, I'm like jazzed. So
yeah, I myself have watched a couple more episodes since we last spoke, and I'm still very much enjoying what I'm seeing. Unfortunately, I'm watching it on Hulu, and I have commercials.
You have commercials,
it's a fucking nightmare. So I haven't been watching as much as I would if it was on, say, Netflix. Hey,
Right.
Netflix, why isn't the show on Netflix?
I'm surprised about that. Yeah, how did that happen?
HBO Max, they didn't have Dune, and then all of a sudden they're about to release Dune, and Dune showed up on HBO Max. Netflix, get your shit together. Like, I don't care what you have to pay. I want to watch the cartoon series before I watch the live action, so I can compare and contrast. Come on, get your shit together. Unbelievable.
They suck.
Anything else, Mike?
That's pretty much it for me, aside from our stuff. Yeah, I mean, video game wise, we just had a big Nintendo Direct about Animal Crossing. So in a few weeks, I'm gonna be
There could be some updates.
tearing up my dollhouse. Basically, my dollhouse that's made for 9-year-old Japanese children.
Sounds like a fun game.
Gonna be great.
Personally, FIFA came out a couple weeks back, so I've been playing a little bit of FIFA as we're on the topic of video games. FIFA is fine. It's the one EA Sports video game that I buy every year still, because I'm stupid. Whatever. But I want to play it, and I want to play it with updated rosters and current uniforms. And yeah, it's not a $70 product, but I pay $70 for it every year. It's a stupid tax, and I'm stupid.
Yeah.
But I've been listening to a bunch of music recently, and I was telling you a little bit about this artist last night, and it's Julia Jacklin. And she is an Australian artist, singer-songwriter. And I gotta tell you, I heard like a song or two, and I heard her do a cover of Someday by The Strokes.
Yeah. That's cool.
And it was just very different. And I decided to like go into her discography, and she's sort of got like this alt country feel to a lot of her music. And her last album, I believe, is Crashing.
Okay,
or
I'll check
Crushing. And it's about a breakup, and a bad breakup. Like at one point there's a song where it's like, it's bad when your parents fly into town just to stand by your side. It's just like, all right. So it's pretty dark, and it's pretty emotionally laced album, but
that sounds good. That sounds cool.
I was really blown away by a lot of what I heard. A lot of relatable sort of themes of just like processing, breakup, or processing trauma, or whatever it may be.
Sure.
And dealing with, depression and whatnot. It just, a very, very cohesive album in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. Like, this album was created about a thing. You'll hear songs or series of songs by artists where it's like, okay, well, maybe this was happening in their life. But like, as far as I can tell, this entire thing is about processing, the end of a serious relationship. And it's really, really impressive.
Cool.
And very enjoyable. So
Cool.
I highly recommend you give Julia Jacklin a spin if you are so inclined. Well, Mike, I think it does it for this week, unless you have anything else to add.
That's it. Looking forward to Dune.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we'll be here again next week talking about hopefully a better Dune.
A better Dune, yes. To a better Dune.
We can all dream of a world of a better Dune. That's what Paul dreams about. He dreams about a better Dune. All right, for those of you listening along, you can head on over to subjecttoblackout.com where you can reach out to us, and you can also find the links to all of our socials, including Instagram, Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, you can feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on any of those. And lastly, you can find Mike on Instagram and Twitter at the Taken Podcast. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Right on, Tim.
Fear is the mind killer.